As if that's all one word, .org.
You know, but that doesn't mean that we won't still.
Yeah.
Coming.
Yeah.
Is that right?
But I don't think we've got anything like that
That'd
in
be
our
good to-
area.
Oh,
As
yeah.
if that's all
Changes
one
everything
word,
around.
.org.
You know, but that doesn't mean that we won't still.
Yeah.
Coming.
Okay, we are live.
All right. So, all this meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission to order. And we'll have a roll call. Now, Heather, I never know who's supposed to do the roll call. Do I call it? Okay.
Well, Secretary.
Secretary calls it?
Okay. Moen,
Here.
Stampin,
Here.
Barber, here, Rodebush,
Here,
everybody's here.
Thank you. Approval of minutes from January 26. I see no changes from my
think we're good.
end. Any revisions, suggestions?
One thing, we either need to attach 2 more documents or get rid of the word attached in 2 places.
Where do you see attached?
There's one on page 1
first page, third page.
and one on page 2 and one on page 3. And
3 of them.
And we have
the
all
third
those.
one is attached, but the first 2 aren't.
Yeah, we have them all, so.
You
not a
have it, so
problem.
you can do it?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, well, then that
Okay.
takes care of it.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve minutes
So moved.
and a second?
Second.
Okay. Minutes are approved. I think there's no introduction and status of a new member today, as far as I know.
You
Heather,
know what I know.
sounds like the mayor is working on this, and we appreciate that. And I know there's been some difficulty in identifying the right person to that will accept that invitation, but hopefully we'll get that in place soon. Heather, report on State Historic Preservation Advisory Board.
Yes, the advisory board did meet later last month, and they went over some survey results. And then we drafted some recommendation ideas for the 5-year plan for preservation. And they are putting a document together, a draft document, and they hope at the next meeting we'll have something to react to. So it was a good meeting. And they, for whatever reason, they didn't want the survey results yet released. So I'm not sure if they're cleaning it up or what, but I think a lot of the results were interesting. They were really that they found that there was a real lack of knowledge, which is probably not surprising, between the public that responded about historic preservation versus the professionals. So they felt like that's something that really needs to be part of the next plan, is an educational
So
component.
the professionals were responding in much greater number?
No, just that how things were rated based on the questions they gave. They saw a gap in knowledge from the public versus the professionals, which is, again, probably not surprising, but I think the group thought it was surprising, though, the big gap there was.
Okay,
So, yeah, I mean, if we're allowed to share the survey at some point, certainly I will. 'Cause
Great.
It is interesting. But there were a lot of themes that were, I think, shared by many people, which include having some sort of incentive for residential property owners. That is a continued theme that got a lot of positive response. So I see that as being a big recommendation that comes out of the next 5-year plan.
incentive financially?
Yeah, like a tax credit.
Excellent,
There are other states that do that.
great. Good.
And that next meeting is in the
We
fall?
don't have a next meeting scheduled yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, we move on to the problem at hand, the CLG, the Certified Local Government Program. I don't think we need to do a review of the process so far, but I do feel like it's encouraging. our work with the city council, and I appreciate their interest and diligence in really participating with us in working on the document. How should we proceed today in discussing? Well, I'm open to suggestions.
Maybe just to go down through the copy that's with editing shown, where they've got the strike throughs and
Shall we go through the entire document as it's been amended so far or
May-
proposed?
It's up to you all. I mean, clearly it's in council's hands at this point, so I
Right.
I think that,
can't say much else.
I mean, I looked it over fairly carefully, and it, as far as I can tell, it reflects everything that council agreed to do on the 22nd. So I don't know that there's anything in the details that we need to look at necessarily. There's this big issue about definition. I mean, there are several big issues that remain. One is about landscaping, but, you know, we already have offered a possible amendment on that. And so in my mind, the biggest issue is this question of definitions of listed properties, contributing properties, non-contributing properties. And maybe it would help if we talked about that and sort of had
I think so.
had
Yeah.
a general agreement of what we would support if we get a chance.
Right.
We've got a chance sitting right back there now.
Yeah.
At least somebody will listen to us.
Well, I know Les and Chris have both weighed in on this, and maybe you could explain again what you're proposing. I think the last memo that I had was was it from you, Chris? Were you the last one to send a message today?
About a couple hours ago.
I
Yeah.
suspect. Well, maybe I should just set it up in terms of the way I see it. I feel guilty in some ways not to have recognized this as clearly before as I see it now, that term listed property, even the way we defined it, included everything in a historic district. We didn't use the word non-contributing properties, but we did say every property within a historic district. So, you know, all of the fooling around that I did and have continued to do with members of council, pointing out that we should add the phrase non-contributing properties in historic districts, would all go away. There would be really no need for any of that set of qualifiers or expanders if somehow or other council were willing to restore the phrase listed property to include everything that goes on the local register. And, you know, it would require Heather or one of us or somebody to go through and change everything back again from the way Jeff Dennis has it. But I think that's a relatively easy job to do. So I don't know. I would hope maybe we could convince council that just using the phrase listed property would simplify everything and maybe make SHPO and the National Park Service happier because it's terminology that they're familiar with. But
I know.
Chris has some specific language that she's recommending.
Yeah.
I think when I'm reading this, I always try to think of it in terms of if I'm working with a client trying to apply for a COA, you know, what am I doing to it? What am I looking for? So that's sort of the lens I keep looking at it from. And if I'm as a property owner or as a, you know, someone working with a client, I think the extra verbiage of contributing or non-contributing would just become cumbersome. And I mean, that's why we initially, you know, sort of combined them because it doesn't matter. It's either an individually listed and the COA applies, or it's within the district and the COA applies. It doesn't in terms of having to apply, knowing if you have to apply for a COA, if it's in the local register, you apply. So I think if we start parceling out contributing and non-contributing, it just is going to, I just felt like it was going to start muddying the water when people are looking at, okay, what do I need to do if I want to,
Yeah.
put a new roof on?
So just to clarify, we still need those definitions in
Yeah.
the document, but we don't
Right.
need to use them the way we've been using them.
Right.
You mean the definitions of contributing and
Yeah,
non-contributing?
Well,
Oh,
and to go further, which was, I guess my point being, a contributing and non-contributing property can exist without a designation. Does that make sense? I mean, you can have a building inventory, determine something's contributing or non-contributing, but doesn't mean it's locally designated. So that was the huge difference.
Mm.
So I think I've really struggled with this. I mean, I've had several conversations because I think our whole document was almost based on that phrase, listed property.
Right.
And so when you remove just one definition, it's a domino effect on the entire document.
Mhm.
And so I really was struggling with that. And especially when you're handed something right during a meeting, you're not able to really
Right.
digest the thoughts behind that. And so what are you actually gaining, or what's the value added in that? I'm not real sure. And so I struggled with this tremendously, and I've talked to the state, and they're reviewing the document now because I don't want to have any red flags after all this work. Ordinance is passed, and then National Park Service kicks it back and says, we can't approve this based on these following criteria. And so that's my concern. So I haven't heard back yet from Nathan Bevel, but I know he has did a real quick look over, and he already had one red flag on how the commission was reworded, the composition of the commission. I don't think it was very strong wording. And they really, really, really want someone of historic preservation profession or experience. So I have a feeling that's what he's going to kick back. He already told me that, but he didn't say exactly how he wants that worded. So, but again, that was his first email. He's going to look at the rest of it. And then I feel a little guilty because it's not done. So he's only looking at really a portion of it that was edited.
So your sense is that, at least the sense is that listed would be more appropriate for what we think Nathan would want and the state board?
I would say so, but he wasn't as clear about that because
Yeah.
I don't think he looked at those details. And he said you can have very vague definitions. He said there's communities that hardly have any definitions. There's some where they're very specific and it tends to be more helpful, but it's just certain, I think, keywords that they want in there. And he said National Park Service has gotten really picky about ordinances the past few years. He said he's been there a very long time and he remembers where they'd hardly look at them and have zero comments. But now he said it's really the opposite. They look at them very closely.
Probably trying to make things real uniform through the country
Sure.
on
yeah,
terms and words.
Sure.
So we would have, if that proposal would be accepted by council, we would have the overlay district, which within that would have listed properties, and they would all be listed within that overlay, right? Every property would be listed. And of those listed properties, we would have contributing and non-contributing
That's right, yeah.
Correct.
buildings,
Yes.
right? So it just kind of
Right.
works its way down from listed. And listed is just kind of an abbreviation, I guess, of,
Mhm.
of whatever property is in that overlay district.
Well, and if you remember, Nathan already reviewed our document and had very minor comments. So, when you start tweaking things here and there, you just want to make sure that we're on that right track of CLG status. Worst case scenario, an ordinance passes and National Park Service reviews it and they have comments, then we have to redo the ordinance.
Right.
But trying to catch those big things first would be,
Sure.
I think, the smart thing we can do.
So,
Listed is really kind of shorthand for listed on the local register.
Right.
And if you
You know,
remember
we're
that
not
long.
defining it, but
Well,
that's really
I
what
think
it
it's
means.
just
And I
Like
don't
it
forget
says
that
list.
meeting where we talked about listed or the local register. We wanted to get away from that terminology because we felt it was too confusing to the average public who thinks here's register and they think of national register. And so that's why I remember that you all didn't want to go with
Not using that
as the
word.
primary.
yeah,
Right.
It's still a thing. It's an official list, but we
Right.
felt that listed property was a little more distinctive.
To me, it's like all inclusive. Like if you have a boundary, which I've seen in some of the other city maps, they'll have in there, they'll identify the conforming, non-conforming, and those to me then go to a list.
Correct.
As either a conforming, non-conforming. So to
Right.
me, it's just, it's a list.
Right,
It's part of the, probably be part of the building inventory.
yes.
So how do we feel about that? Are we kind of agreeing to that terminology that we would go back and re-propose to the council?
I think we should, and I guess in a way we already have, since both Rachel and Jeff, at least, those two at least, and now Bill, 3 people have heard that we are sort of struggling with this definitional thing and think that listed property is something that ought to be reconsidered.
We haven't had any feedback from any of them, right? Okay.
Not
Now, why-
directly, although I think Rachel has talked informally to both Heather
Okay.
and Chris.
So remind me of why this change came about in the first place.
Close your ears. It is really, I think it's basically Jeff going through the document and trying to find ways to make it, my words now, legally more precise or efficient. So when I was talking with him about it, he did convince me that logically using contributing property instead of listed property made sense. And logically it still does, but there are all these other issues of more practical import that remain. And I wish now in retrospect I hadn't agreed to it, but
I know when we first started this discussion a year ago, I had trouble with that term, listed. It took me a while. I mean,
Yeah, it's-
maybe until right now to figure out what that means. So I can understand why other people might not quite understand it either.
To me, the way we had it defined, it did include the special character historic properties, and it says, or any property within a historic district
Right.
pursuant to the chapter. So to me, that definition includes conforming, non-conforming. It doesn't
Right.
say it. It doesn't
But,
say those
yeah.
words. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't need
and
to.
that was certainly the intent.
Yeah, I think personally you have to have all 3. I think you have to have listed properties because that's, because non-conforming
So
property
that's
is
the
not.
umbrella term.
Yeah,
right?
it's a list.
Right.
That's what it says, listed. I mean, I take it as listed, so it's a, like the place where you keep track of the non-conforming properties and the conforming properties within the district. All of it, every building, either one or the other.
As well as the individual one.
Okay,
That's
so
my feeling.
Les, could you write that up again and forward it to the council or to?
Well,
I think just the way it was worded, I
think-
think.
well, that, or I think that Chris's
Or Chris, we use your
Chris's
definition?
language is,
I didn't see
Is
it.
Okay,
good.
that's
Yeah,
fine.
I can-
Apologize, I didn't see it.
No, I just sent it maybe a couple hours ago.
so the main thing is that it sounds like we're all in agreement that if we have any chance at all, we want to urge council to reintroduce the definition listed property. But is that
I
Well,
agree.
for all
well,
of us?
I think it's not whether we have a chance or not, but we'd like to make it as agreeable to the state board when we present this, so that we don't have to come back and redefine things, or at least redefine that particular term. I mean, I'm basing this also on what Heather is telling us, that certainly could be a problem down the road. So let's avoid that problem if we can.
Okay, so given that, then if we can also reach agreement among ourselves on specific wording, then we could jointly recommend that to council as well, and that's where Chris's language maybe comes in. Have you
No.
seen this?
Okay, we have
I
a
can-
question from our lobby. Bill?
We have a question for him.
Would you like to hear his
Yeah.
his comment? No?
I would.
Okay, sure.
Two suggestions. First of all, I will not make any suggestion on how to convince council of anything because, as you know, that's not necessarily a good track record for me lately. But in terms of this, if there's a set vote, so that it's a clear message to council, and then we're all familiar with frequently asked questions. If there's some way within the definition, whatever wording you come up with, you could kind of incorporate proactively what some of those questions would be. For example, you brought some of them up. Listed property consists of conforming and non-conforming, or just something that if somebody does try and travel this path again in the definition, it kind of answers those questions. It's not strictly the definition, but it might help in terms of conveying it. And then I would encourage you that if you think that it would be worthwhile to have like a Venn diagram or something like that included. I know when we're doing the zoning update, we're getting beyond just words and getting into diagrams and such. So if that's something that would add to the clarity, that would be that'd be great.
I think a diagram would be useful.
We have the diagram, remember? I put it in the FAQs.
Well, if
Yeah.
it's specifically in the definitions.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I'll find that. I remember that.
Somewhere.
I have that someplace. Yeah, it looks like this.
Yep. Mhm.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's just see what Heather put together for us again, just to review. Does this use the word listing here somewhere? You know,
Oh, I don't remember. I have to-
Listed property. Oh, sorry, you're talking about something else.
if I'm looking at the right
flow
one.
chart.
If I'm looking at the right chart there. Yeah. I don't think that uses the word listed though, does it?
We
Does it?
just we called it proposed process, local designation of listed properties. The
It's in
title on the left.
definition, the title.
Okay. Yes. All right. So maybe this would be something that we would want to forward to council. They probably already have it, but we could forward it
Somewhere.
again. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Somewhere.
It's easy to lose track of things. But I think we still need a statement to that effect from either from Chris or from Wes, explaining,
Oh, sorry.
just explaining why we feel maybe we should revisit that term.
How about, I'd like to move that we formally adopt and recommend to City Council the definition of listed property that Chris has proposed, which is listed property means any property designated pursuant to the process outlined in section 15806 and listed in the local register, individually or as part of a historic district, including non-contributing properties.
I'll second that.
Okay. You have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I like this because it uses the approach that Jeff Dennis has proposed, so it's sort of taking advantage of the direction council has already been moving, but gets listed property back in the listed definition.
Okay.
And just so that everybody understands, Mark, we've been talking about this, that if council were to do that, basically it would mean substituting listed property for most of the instances, not all, but most of the instances in the document where contributing property, a la Jeff, is now used. Most of them would have to be changed back to listed property with a few exceptions. And so some individual would have to go carefully through and make sure that all of that was was corrected if council were to follow our recommendation here.
Sorry, Heather, that would probably be you.
Oh, that's okay.
Chris, where is that statement? Is it on this?
It is.
Okay,
Yeah, it's all on this page.
thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second and discussion, call for a vote.
I could just add first, if the commission wanted me to do it, I or anybody up here could in a little transmittal memo to council, explain our reasons for wanting the change. And somehow or other, we could contrive to get that to council before Monday night.
Yeah.
When they're
Well, there may be
reconvening
more,
as
there
a
may be
committee of the
more
whole.
too that we would want.
Right.
There may be more. That may be the first thing to go to council, but
Yeah, there may be more, but
yeah.
Okay, Les, that would be great if you'd do that.
I'd
Okay,
be
with-
happy
with-
to as well if you.
Or Chris?
Yeah.
So Chris, we'll let you handle that one then.
Okay.
And I guess that would go to Mark, right, as the
Council President.
president of the council. Okay?
The vote,
Yeah.
aye.
Okay, Les?
I,
Aye.
Aye.
Sampson? Okay, that carries. Okay,
And
so,
probably in that, what goes forward, even like was suggested, that maybe show the vote was unanimous by the HPC for that.
Right.
In the memo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
all right, other concerns from where we stand now. I know some of you have had a chance to go through the cleaned up version. Les, you have something else first?
we could, I think probably we should look at Chris's suggestions for changing the definitions of contributing property and historic overlay zone. I mean, I think these are relatively minor changes,
Mhm.
Chris, but they are hers. And again, if we had a united front, then we can present that to council too.
Okay, you want to explain that, Chris? What are
Yeah.
you proposing?
And this is, so my definitions, as Les kind of mentioned, they stem from what Jeff and Rachel have been working on. So the definition for contributing property means any building, structure, or site designated as part of a historic district pursuant to the process outlined in section 15806 because of its significance to a historic district. And I did note that only works if we're going back to the original, kind of framework we'd set up where there's a listed property that encompasses individual and historic, and then contributing is within the historic district. If we want to use contributing property to mean also an individually listed, then Rachel's suggestion of the second half of that sentence outlined in section 15806 because of its historic significance. And I think either one is sufficient. It just depends on how that is
Yeah.
being used throughout the document.
So to my mind, I guess that Rachel's is better because then we don't have to change your suggestion to include individual properties.
Right, contributing could mean
Would mean both individual
and
and
historic. And a contributing property to a historic district.
yes.
All right.
It's tough to just look at the definitions that, Rachel and I chatted about without knowing what other, where that's affected throughout the document. And so that's why I kind of caveated my comment about that to state that this
So
only
I-
works if it's only about districts.
But it's not, so. Yeah, so are you comfortable with Rachel's
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
I am
okay,
comfortable with
then maybe we shouldn't do anything more on that. Rachel's is already before the commission. I mean, already before council.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so no change on H, is that right? Okay,
Maybe
all right, then you have a letter M. Chris?
Letter M, historic overlay zone means the area shown on the zoning map is a historic overlay zone containing listed property or Rachel said listed property or property within a historic district. I just took out property within because it just seemed like it wasn't necessarily needed, but protected through an additional set of historic preservation regulation. So Rachel's definition stated protected through an additional set of historic and architectural regulation. I was worried that would limit our ability to list a property that had significance that wasn't necessarily architectural, but maybe was due to an event or that occurred in town or those sorts of. I mean, I think it's easy to visually understand a historic property from an architectural standpoint, but sometimes people are wanting to list properties because of events that occurred there and the building is, or maybe there's not even a building there, so I just would hate to kind of like limit what we can do if we're listing it as architectural.
So you would take out that word architectural.
Right.
That would be the major difference of that. And then you just reworded historic districts. Or you added historic districts to that sentence.
Her definition was properties within a historic district, and I guess I didn't see the value in adding that one. We could just say historic district. But again, that was just me kind of thinking that taking some of that language out was simplifying it.
Okay. Discussion?
Yeah, I think that's a worthy change because architecture is only one of what we have about 10 different criteria, right?
Right.
And architecture is only one of those.
So
Yeah, I think that's.
in particular, that word and then we can also propose at the same time the other change that you're proposing, historic districts. At least for their consideration, right? Okay.
So I will move that we accept and recommend to council Chris's suggested revision of the overlay zone definition, historic overlay zone definition.
Okay, I'll second that. Any further discussion? I guess I can second, can't I, as chair? I'm going to anyway. Call for vote? Okay, Will?
Aye.
Les?
Aye.
Sampson, yes, aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right. Was there anything else, Chris, that you were proposing?
Well, I just wanted to note because I had a conversation with Les and he shared that information with Rachel that I'd suggested a non-contributing property definition that was a little bit more extensive than what Jeff had in what we looked over on Monday. And then Jeff and Rachel reworked that to state non-contributing property is a classification applied to a property within a historic district signifying that it did not, at the time of the district designation, contribute to the qualities that give the historic district significance, but which, because of its location within a district, should be compatible with the character of the district.
Okay. Rachel did not put that in this latest draft from her.
Okay, and this was from a discussion I had with her yesterday, so it might have, I don't know what version she's on now.
My only concern is that most of our definitions are very short and succinct, and that's getting lengthy, and And maybe it's important to have that, but it's much longer. So,
This is just a thought off the top of my head. If that change were not made, is that a guideline that we could adopt ourselves subsequently to use in helping us define
Well,
such differences?
we would be the ones doing it, right? I would think.
You
Making-
mean we would be the ones defining contributing and non-contributing?
Right.
Not
We
necessarily.
could be, but if,
I mean, it's
if,
part of your building inventory process, so if you
Right.
hire somebody to do that, let's say with CLG money,
Uh-huh,
then they're telling you, here's my opinion as
okay.
an
Someplace
expert.
someplace I don't know where I was reading too about the non-contributing property sort of being maintained, so it's not deteriorating.
Yeah,
Les and I talked about-
deal with that elsewhere in the
Okay,
ordinance. yeah.
Okay,
Here, it's just a definitional issue.
yeah,
I
as
think
long as
it's important for that definition to be much more specific than whatever is not a contributing property. I mean, from an enforcement standpoint, a definition like that is very problematic. I guess I put the enforcer hat on, whereas everybody else tends to do the opposite of that. And I tend to, for me, specificity is really important when it comes to
Yeah.
sharing the
it's not,
document with an average person to be able to comprehend that.
Okay,
And that's a practical consideration, and I think
Right.
we all had practical considerations in mind when we wrote this document. And some members of council have been looking at it more from a kind of legal, strictly legal point of view. And, well, I'm in favor of that, of Chris's language.
okay.
I would be willing to
You don't think it's too long?
recommend, no,
Sure, Okay,
for the reasons that Heather just stated, I think it's a useful thing for practical purposes in the long run.
okay. So we can pursue that and see how they might feel about reviewing and renewing that particular definition. All right,
Shall
shall
we
we?
do the same
take a-
motion thing so that we can include
Yes,
that too?
yes.
And so then I would move that we adopt that, but you'll need to give me the language.
do you want it now or do I need to email?
don't
I
know,
can email
later.
it to you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have a second?
second,
All right, call for vote.
I,
I,
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So what next? As I said, I have not had a chance to read the cleaned up version. Thank you again, Heather, for making this happen. I know some of you had a chance to spend a little more time with it. So any concerns with the way this is looking?
I think it's looking good. I don't know exactly how council will go about it Monday night, but one of the things they might do, Jeff said that he would recommend 3 or 4 sort of cleanup things that I had suggested to him. If that happens, and if council invites its members to go back over this cleaned up version, just to make sure that there are no lingering issues about any of it, then that will be an opportunity for Rachel or maybe even us to make these points about what the new language we'd like to see inserted. And then after that, it'll be council considering Rachel's other changes, which I think we've already looked at and find to be acceptable or even more than acceptable.
right.
They're good. And then after that, there are a few particular little things, a couple maybe from Greg and maybe from others, as well as the big issues about the big issue about landscaping. I mean, that's obviously going to come up. I don't know. I mean, it looks like we can rely on council at this point. Finish the job.
No, I think it's very encouraging. it was a long session the other night, but we really appreciate council's interest and concentration and working with us on trying to make this a better ordinance, and I think we're getting there. Is landscaping something we want to discuss this afternoon?
It depends. Will and I
That's
came
not
up with
fine where-
some proposed language. I think
I saw it again, but I
I've
don't
seen it.
remember where I saw it.
um,
Oh.
it's included, Rachel included it in what she sent out last night. We have not previously talked about it as a commission. It
Yeah,
was
maybe we should
something that Will and I put
maybe-
together.
spend at least 5 minutes talking about that subject, just so we're up to speed on it. Is that in some of our documents here?
Do you have Rachel's
I'll
stuff from
find out.
last night?
I don't know. I have too many messages here. All right, I must have.
Was that the one that Heather sent today?
Or, yeah, right, the one Heather sent today.
Okay.
I've
then-
lost track myself, so I'm not really sure.
Here it is. Here it is, John. It's a proposed, it's two parts, a proposed change to the definition and a change to section,
So this is the change, or this is
this
the
is
change? Okay,
section
Yeah.
to
158.08,
08, yeah.
1 and 2. Okay, I'm going to read that so we can think about it. This is 158.08. Landscaping shall be provided and maintained on contributing properties and properties within a historic district. Contributing properties and properties within a historic district must maintain appropriate foundation plantings across the front. Such plantings shall be minimally decorative shrubs and/or small trees set at intervals no wider than 6 feet apart along the interrupted by house steps, for example, foundation frontage. Such plantings shall be regularly pruned and weeded, including removal of volunteer weed trees. Contributing properties and properties within a historic district must also maintain other appropriate landscaping. These requirements do not ordinarily apply to downtown buildings. Now, this is language that Rachel came up with.
No,
This is less.
You guys did. And she was supportive?
I think she proposed changing it a little bit, but,
Okay,
and I don't know whether she's supporting it.
okay.
She's putting it forth as something that
Something for
that
discussion.
we recommend.
Okay. And number 2, in definitions at 158.03, landscaping vegetation such as trees, shrubs, grass, and other natural ground covers, orchards, hedges, windbreaks, gardens, fences, and non-natural attractive ground cover such as decorative rocks used to preserve the historic relationship between buildings and surrounding landscape.
We included fences because that's actually part of landscaping, or could be. You could have walls, fences, benches. You keep going, but I mean, that's part of landscaping, and a lot of that, when I kind of drafted, was coming from the standards, this Secretary of Interior, and the
number-
preserve the historic relationship between, that was coming right from the Secretary of Interior.
The number 2,
The number 2. right,
yes, okay,
Not the bottom one, not the current definition.
right.
We also
We were
tend to
pro-
have retaining walls here a lot because of the sand hills. And I don't know if that's something you may want to, I'm trying to look at BG and what we tend to have come through our office,
Something to add to it?
just to think about,
Like
because that
walls,
is
like
pretty
walls or-
common here.
Something.
Okay,
I should maybe just explain that my argument to Will when we were talking about this language was that we should be so specific about what is an appropriate, what's the phrase, appropriate landscaping. Appropriate foundation planning is basically to deal with bad apples. To try to set things up so that the obvious bad apple examples in our community would have to meet some minimum standards on landscaping. And as I see it, the two really bad apples are the people who do no pruning whatsoever of foundation shrubbery and allow things to grow up above porch roofs and things like that. Your house on, that you've mentioned on Worcester Street
Worcester,
is definitely
yeah,
an example. And the other is something that I see all the time in the first ward. In fact, I just walked past a disgusting example on the way over here at 111 Oak Street. And I'll not mention the beer cans because that's another issue, but what has happened there and with many other properties is owners have let the original foundation plantings in the frontage die and never replaced them. So you get these ugly markers. Oh, wow, that's another rental property for sure. If we could do something to mitigate that in historic districts and with other listed properties, I think we would be doing a real service to the whole community. So that was my argument to Will for being so specific.
So I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Mhm, go ahead.
Is the expectation that an individual would have to get a COA for any work they wish to do to their property when it comes to new
No.
plantings or changing? I'm just
I
making
don't think
sure
so. I
I'm
just-
clear on
They
that.
just like that first sentence. We tried to tie the definition to the procedures back in 15808, where it says landscaping shall be provided and maintained. Not just provided, but and maintained on contributed properties and properties within the historic district. But we're not going to get into checking the appropriateness. That's why then, at first I just had that. And then when I went back and looked at what Les had suggested, I thought that's good to be the specific. So I kind of blended my thoughts, the first sentence saying Les is getting into the detail about the plants and no wider than 6 feet apart.
I have a comment about that because if it's not a COA, if we're not requiring a COA for landscaping, it's more of a maintenance issue. Then I think something would need to be in 15809 about the maintenance requirement, because that would be 15808 is about, the proposed alterations and applying for a COA. I definitely appreciate where this comes from. My concern would be, and I'm not as familiar with sort of like the historic fabric as it pertains to landscaping. But, and I can't think of any specific examples in Bowling Green, but I know of, famous mid-century modern homes. And the landscaping, there is no landscaping for it, because that was part of that sort of, design aesthetic at the time. So I just don't want us to create a situation where we're requiring a landscaping that maybe doesn't fit the historic nature of, of the building. So that's the tough part with that, that specific definition.
Yeah,
So I liked that it was a little more open, because then it could change. If you have a Victorian versus a mid-century modern, the landscape that would be associated with that would be different.
That's why I kind of up in the definition, the last sentence that was proposed, it says, used to preserve the historic relationship between the buildings surrounding. So if there's none or minimal, it's trying to maintain the historic view.
Right.
There's an example in, I think it's the guidelines, the 1995 version or 97 version. And it actually shows looks like a barn or building someplace in the United States. And part of it is they wanted even the drive maintained where the wagons used to go as part of the landscaping.
Right.
I mean, it gets down to the petty little thing, but we don't get into that, I don't think.
Well, I'm just looking at too what the responsibility is of our office. What does that look like? We are not preservationists. We're not architects. We're not, landscape architects. So is someone gonna call us and say, I'm complaining about my neighbor because they don't have any landscaping? Or, you know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to see what does that look like for our office? Typically, you go through a permit approval process because you want to compare someone's request, get all the criteria based on what's in your ordinances. So to have, you know, I'm just trying to think whose responsibility is that to figure out what's part of the fabric of that streetscape or era or whatever.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to think it out loud, what this actually looks like and the level of responsibility.
Yeah, we were reluctant to put it into the COA part of things because it's just so complicated. And so we chose not to go that route, which leaves it, I guess, to the city enforcers to enforce. And we tried to be as specific as possible. Chris raises a good point. Okay, so maybe it works fine for everything that might be considered historic right now. I mean, I've lived in this city for 50 years. When I came here, there were no buildings in the first ward that didn't have foundation plantings
Right.
in front of them. None, zero. And the city isn't that old, which says to me, those foundation plantings were pretty much original. But, okay, in the 1950s, 60s, maybe there was a style of architecture that you're saying that just didn't do frontage lands, shrubs and
Right.
trees.
And I can't
So
think of
it's a
an
problem.
example
It's a
here that
problem.
has a, you know, home like that, but I just because I can't think of it doesn't, you know, there isn't one.
Yeah, this is a tough one. And I think what we're trying to do is prevent really an outlandish situation like we talked about with one of the homes on Worcester, because I don't see us as being policemen and women on this, but at the same time, there should be some way of monitoring how that space looks. Now, we do have in our document under 158.09 that owners who fail to provide reasonable care and maintenance shall be fined not more than $500. That's the penalty. Maybe we should consider changing the word shall to may be fined, so that it's not a,
Yeah,
we're not wanting to
Not
do
definite.
this. There's no desire to collect money for making people plant shrubs, but we would like them to take care of their space, and that just might make it a little bit more palatable. I don't know. What do you think?
What's the section?
158.09.
like the last sentence.
Yeah.
I think that's better.
And maybe $500 is too much. I don't know how council will look at that, but I think that is a concern.
I mean, it just occurred to me that possibly we could put a provision in this, add a provision in this suggested new wording that says something like, and I won't be able to do it now, but you'll understand what I mean. Unless the historic period being represented by a building involves the use of no landscaping.
So how
Understand
did,
what I'm trying
Maybe
to say?
something about appropriate for the historic period or something, or
how would we look at Chris's house, which is what, about 1890, 1885, something like that?
1894.
1894, my house is about the same.
Mhm.
Would there have been landscaping then? Would they have, I mean,
I'm sure there would have been.
they would have planted trees, but
Well, the
Hard to
whole
know.
street was lined with trees at one point.
yes, we've lost a lot
We
of
all
trees.
lost that.
We just lost one today on Maple Street, North Maple, a dead tree that came down. So that's tough, yeah.
maybe
Well,
back in the definition on the last sentence where it says adding the word appropriate in front of historic. So it read used to preserve the appropriate historic relationship between buildings and surrounding landscape.
I'm fine with that.
That way, if things change,
Okay, where, oh, no, okay, here. Okay, what, will, where?
it's in the last sentence of
Yeah.
in definition 15803s, used to preserve the appropriate historic
Appropriate.
relationship between buildings and surrounding landscape. That sound better, Chris?
I think, yeah, I do think that,
If things change,
right. I guess my concern was more with the suggested addition, or maybe it wasn't, but in 15808, that
What about
the
if we?
number one in the,
Yeah, what about if we said it, we added at the end of that first sentence? Landscaping shall be provided and maintained on contributing properties and properties within historic second sentence. Contributing properties and properties within a historic district must maintain appropriate foundation plantings across their front as appropriate to their historic era. Need some wordsmithing.
mhm.
So the idea would be if zero landscaping in front was appropriate to a particular historic era, that would be okay with us.
Okay, but who is figuring that one out? Because we don't have the qualifications in our office. I'm just trying to point out what, you know, how we're actually gonna.
Okay, just talking. If you got a complaint about something, or if your enforcement people identified a possible problem, whichever, then you would consult with the HPC to get some information about the historic era, or you would already know it. And if it were not a historic era in which no foundation plantings were appropriate, then the rule is there have to be trees, small trees or shrubs every 6 feet apart across the front.
It's tricky there.
Well,
I guess I would see it that we would just throw it back at us and we would
I think that's
make
going to
a
be part of,
judgment, make our best judgment.
we just offering advice.
Yeah.
Something
I
that
mean,
won't be,
again, I don't see this as being, we're not going to be police.
we're trying to encourage things, I
Police.
think.
Yeah.
I'd rather encourage than enforce.
well, I'll tell you something, with some owners in this town, they ain't gonna change it
They're
if it's
gonna
not
be
forced.
encouraged. Encouragement's not part of their vocabulary.
Okay, so let's make, do you like the one change that Will suggested, adding that one word? Appropriate?
The definition?
Yeah.
Or
In
Definition,
the definition,
103 landscaping.
okay? I think that's no problem, but as far as I'm concerned. And how about making the change, at least the suggested chain of, on the fine, saying may be fined rather than shall be fined?
And 15809,
158.09, correct.
Yep.
Two minor changes, which we can recommend at least. And let's let it stand otherwise for now, as it reads. Heather, are you okay with that? Not really?
I'm good with whatever you all do. It's just, I'm thinking long-term practicalities.
Yeah. Well, I see this whole thing, this whole ordinance as something that's still going to be changed down the road. I mean, we're going to, don't you feel that we put it in place and then we find that some wording doesn't work for our community? We we have to vote a different change. So I think
Mature.
no matter how careful we are with the way we word this, it's still not going to be perfect. So I don't think we should, totally kill ourselves trying to hash every angle. Okay,
I mean, essentially, this is in council's hands,
right.
and they will do anything from accepting what we have here to just throwing it out entirely or somewhere in between. So I guess I would like to just ask whether, for us as a group, just talking about our preference, not necessarily in terms of what we think council would agree to, whether adding the additional language in 15808 that I suggested is worth doing to maybe make it a little easier for them to agree to it.
I'm fine with that too, Wes. I think that's fine.
Yeah, leave what you had.
So I'll just read what Les is proposing. Contributing properties within the historic district must maintain appropriate foundation plantings across their front as appropriate to their historic era.
Right.
Okay? So that gives a little leeway there. Okay, so 3 small changes from that category of landscaping.
Okay, and so do we have consensus on those 3 changes?
I think we need a vote.
I'd make a motion that we accept those 3 changes as you read.
Okay, I'll second. Further discussion? I don't think there's any. All right, Will?
Yes.
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 Okay. All right.
So we have four things that we're going to recommend to council. One about listed properties, one about overlay zone, one about non-contributing, and one about landscaping.
Great. Okay, well, I'm hoping that we can make this a rather short meeting. Any other business we do need, at some point, need to talk about goals. I wouldn't mind putting that off for another meeting.
I've been looking into about funds and may get with Chris sometime about tax incentives and that whole thing about funding, because I think that's going to be one of the benefits of this whole historic preservational help and finding things like I saw in Cleveland. And I did talk to the mayor about the establishment of a foundation. So I think that's can move forward, but he's basically saying, that we wouldn't be moving forward on it until this gets approved all the way through Bowling Green and the state.
Yeah.
Then we would, but he was encouraged about the city being helping with the endowment, which I thought was really nice.
Would you like that on a future?
I'll just keep working on looking and reading about it.
Great.
Because I think that's part of when this all comes to fruition and we actually implement things, it'll be, I'd rather kind of start discovering things about grants, and I need to read up on tax incentives, and because we get questions on it and I don't understand exactly.
Well, I think one of our goals is the education component, and that could be one of the first, things that we do is hold a
seminar.
yeah, right, exactly.
Get a
On the historic preservation tax program.
speaker or yourself or speakers, come in and maybe even from the state or something to
Yeah, great.
talk. I think good.
Agree. I think that, well, we shouldn't try to do it today. I think that one of the things we need to do at our next meeting, assuming that that council approves the ordinance, is that we need to decide what are the most pressing next agenda issues for us. Is it public education? Is that more important than anything else going into the next stages of this? Or is it trying to encourage some actual historic district or property applications?
I mean, like maybe
Like-
building inventories or.
And then, or is it
Yeah.
building inventories, or is
There's
it
a
all
bunch of
three
them,
at the
yeah.
same time?
Right.
Somewhat overwhelming, but
Yeah,
I
Well,
really think that priorities are
Right.
important for us.
I think
Our
it'd be-
most immediate priority will be finishing the CLG
Yeah,
checklist
The
item. Yes.
checklist.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And Heather sent us that checklist someplace in my stack of materials. Why don't we all take a look at that for next time? I think that would be a good idea.
Well, a lot of it's, I hate to say it's pointless, but we did it once already, but we're gonna have to redo it again because any of those section numbers that change, we have to then correspond that new section with the checklist. So that's just the time consuming part.
So we'll just glance at that at
Yeah.
least. And maybe not get too deeply into it, but I think that would be a good idea. And I think at some point, assuming things go well, we're going to want some consultation, maybe with Nathan again on what he feels like is our next step. I mean, he's been through this with a lot of communities, and perhaps he can give us that advice.
Yeah, so hopefully that his office will have good pointers for us on how to do the building inventories. If we get to the point of doing that, I mean, how do you do it?
When I think
Really important.
the Chamber of Commerce did some kind of building inventory. But and I can follow up on that. I know when I talked to Kerry Fan, his architecture faculty, about when he photographed the city's, all the buildings, he did the east side and the west side, and then photoshopped them all together. So you've probably seen that picture. And I was asking him about the buildings, if they got information on it. He talked like Erling Kilpatrick when she was the director of the Chamber of Commerce. I need to contact her and see if she could give me a lead as to who to contact or who has that file. It's probably is it on a computer and then to look at it.
I think it dates before Arlene, actually. It goes back
So it exists.
quite a few years.
It was back to when we had an official Main Street designation and that was stopped. I think during the recession when it was expensive. So I know Arlene was part of that. She's retired now since, of course, but I know part of that was getting Main Street designated. And the problem is what Nathan will tell you is that he felt our downtown designations very small. And so that's one of his suggestions was to make it larger because it doesn't encompass all the historic buildings in downtown. So that would be a step. But I know those building inventories are from probably the early 80s.
And it was usually a small list.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even to find that as a start, just
Yeah. No,
to
we
find
have
out,
that.
like,
I
what
probably
kind of
emailed it
date-
to,
what kind of data exists.
yeah, I can email it to you because I probably did it to the
If you have it,
HBC
yeah.
early on.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
have it somewhere deep in the piles
Right.
of stuff I haven't.
You probably
'Cause
do.
I think even getting historians involved just to figure it's more than just the buildings. I mean, there's a lot of history,
Mhm.
Clark Gable staying at the Milligan. I mean, there's all kinds of history here that we don't even know.
Mhm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Because I always wondered if John D. Rockefeller wasn't involved over here. He'd been in Cleveland. He used to hang out in Hudson and listen to the Carillon there. Dude, that was
How do
probably
you
his.
know this stuff?
That was probably his escape. Well, we went there in architecture class. We went to
Really?
Hudson and looked at the buildings and that. But
Will, that can be your next book, right?
what's that?
History of Bowling Green.
I
Another
think
history book.
I was trying to
Oh,
find
yeah.
that one copy of the pictures and all
Um,
out of them at Ben Franklin. I was going.
Eric Honifer wrote it and he was part of our original study group, if you remember, Les.
Yeah.
What's his
Mhm.
name?
Eric Honifer. You're gonna ask me how to
As
spell
far as
it.
I know, he's not retired, so he's at
Yeah.
the archives at the university?
I thought he retired,
You think
but
he retired?
I think so,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Oh.
And I don't know if he lives in Bowling Green anymore.
No.
'Cause he may be
doesn't.
one, he may
think
be
he moved
really good
down
asset
to-
just to
Moved
get
out of
Did he?
town?
Yeah, I think he
He might
moved
be a
down
good
to.
asset to
Oh,
get
he's-
involved.
Oh, he's excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent.
he's a good person.
He actually
Yeah.
helped me do a walking tour of,
'Cause he
around the
would be a
courthouse.
real asset to this and he'd probably
Think we're
like to be
done,
involved
basically.
Yeah.
Mhm.
in something like this and see
I know
his
you
work
want to
at
get
kind
moving,
of
that's okay.
Yeah.
grow.
This is just
You
stuff
know,
we
it's-
have to
it's
do
Kind of fun.
for the
Okay,
future.
it's good, good. Good ideas, and let's keep track of those and revisit them next week. Okay, so we have lobby visitation.
William Harold, 1030 Conneaut. Um, A comment that you made earlier that really resonated with me was that with all that's going on with the various versions and the changes that are being made, the good news is at some point we will have a document. I think there's a good possibility that it won't be perfect. If for no other reason than really difficult to organize all of the good suggestions and pay attention to them and get them incorporated. So I wanted to echo that you the statement you made and humbly request that if that is something that you all think that maybe in the correspondence to the president of council when you're saying the 4 things that were voted on, maybe a suggestion that we're taking a huge step to get the ordinance in place. And once we have done that, we will be in a much better position to see if anything needs to be changed. And just maybe some sort of a recommendation that after a period of time, and you guys can figure out what period of time that would be, after a period of time, that it be revisited. Because it would not be unusual nor negative to say, okay, well, this part we need to shore up. This part was there's a section that the state may want reworded, but just an acknowledgement and an encouragement that at some point this ordinance be revisited and revised with the additional information that we can't have until it's been in place.
Right.
So that's my humble suggestion.
Thank you.
Can
Thank
I
you.
ask a question? If changes to any ordinances, do they go through city council and require public hearings? Is that part of the process with any, even a word change?
If there is any change to an existing ordinance, it would have to be voted on, which would mean that it would go through the usual process being introduced. Depending on the weight of the change and the decision of the president of council, it may or may not go to committee. But the way that I'm envisioning it is after a certain set time, either a council committee would take another look at it, or perhaps this esteemed body would take a look at it and say, all right, we've had it in place for 6 months or whatever. Let's take a look and make, at that point, we'll have one set version. And then you can go through and say, well, this one, we need to shore up this definition. This is something the state suggested that we change. And we're having trouble implementing this. Maybe this has changed. But we can't know that until it's been in place.
Right.
And that's just the nature of the beast. So maybe it would be Historic Preservation Commission would take a review, put the suggestions, send them along to council. And then at that point, the president of council would either say, well, okay, fine, draw it up, or assign it to a committee and hash it out. Kind of depends on the extent of the changes. And as far as a public hearing, if it goes to committee, committee would meet, and committee meetings must be public. So that's a long answer.
Okay, no, that helps,
Okay,
Great.
the process.
thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Okay. Any one want to suggest we adjourn?
How about the next meeting?
So I think it's the 26th. I think it's the same day of the month.
Is that right, Heather? Do you?
Yes, I may have a scheduling issue, but you guys can meet without me if needed.
I haven't looked at my calendar either, but let's
Okay.
assume
Tentative.
March 26th at 3 o'clock. And we can converse by email if there's going to be a problem on that. And hopefully, the ordinance will have passed by that point. Good luck to us. Thank you.
God bless us, everyone.
Yeah. Tiny